They came from everywhere, all of them traveling these dusty, hot trails to get to this place. Capernaum, that is. It wasn't that this seaside center was of real significance. It wasn't a metropolis. There were probably only about 1,500 people who lived in this town, but many people passed through this fishing town, given it was a major trading center of that region. People heard that Jesus was back in town, and so a crowd squeezed into this house to hear him. This was one of the times I think Jesus would have been better served if he had taken an outdoor venue. We're told very little about the demographic of the people who were there. Were they just passing through, or did they actually live in Capernaum? Were they young? Were they old? Were there children there? Were they really interested in hearing what Jesus had to say, or were they just following the crowd, tagging along with the groupies, so to speak? We know that some of them were locals, at least, religious scholars or legal experts, our text says. Some configuration of this demographic seemed to show up frequently. But the others? Where did they come from? What kind of people were they, and why did they show up? If you're like me at all, these years of dealing with COVID and its variants has heightened my sensitivity to space, but not here. They packed into this place, into someone's house, so tightly that you couldn't get in and you couldn't get out. So that overcrowding might have been an indication that they really wanted to be there. The text that Rod just states said that Jesus was teaching the Word. So what was the Word? Probably it was the Jewish scriptures. And I can imagine that Jesus offered an understanding of these scriptures like they had never heard it before. Some showed up because they were hungry to hear more. Jesus' reputation was widespread, and he rarely was without a crowd eager to learn. In addition, there were times when everyone present had equal access to instruction. Women, men, poor, old, children, schooled and educated. It didn't matter. No one was given preference, except first come, first serve in terms of seating. Apropos seating, no one was willing to give up their seat when this group of 5, these 4 men with their disabled friend, came to the door. They wanted to simply get closer to Jesus, and we can imagine why that was. So imagine that scene. They come to the edge of that group and they say, "Excuse me, can we just get inside with our friend here?" No response. Tap, tap, tap on one shoulder, tap, tap on another. Still no response. None at all. Completely ignored. I can imagine that this unusual party would have caused a commotion. It's not like they didn't notice them trying to wiggle their way into this sardine-packed room. But they wouldn't be deterred. And even when they begin to tear off that roof of the house, the people still didn't respond. Now, if you heard noise overhead and then felt some debris falling on you or around you, wouldn't you say something? I hope so. I think those at the door might have said, "Hey, wait a minute, come on in, we'll let you in. Don't go to those extremes," but that didn't happen. I also wonder when Jesus actually stopped speaking and turned his attention to that man in front of him. His first words to this man surprised me a little. He didn't say, "Wow, I'm really sorry that you had to go to all that trouble to get in to here." No, he said, "Your sins are forgiven." Now, it's highly unlikely that these 4 men brought their friend to Jesus for forgiveness of sins as they understood it. They didn't even have a grid for that because their religion required specific people making sacrifices at specific places at designated times of the year to deal with that sin problem. It doesn't seem a stretch to me to say probably they came for this man to be healed. I would think that's why they came. But after those first surprising words, and before Jesus could even begin to address what they might have come for, a disruption breaks out in response to the words about forgiveness of sin. The religious scholars begin muttering and whispering, confounded by this blasphemy. Obviously, they had gotten there in time to get the seats right next to where Jesus was speaking, and this is what they pick out of everything that Jesus might have said. Doesn't that make you wonder why they came? Was it to criticize, to scrutinize? Of all of the things that the religious scholars could have zeroed in on, everything from what Jesus was teaching to crowd unresponsiveness towards those seeking help, to the destruction of property, to the precarious descent of that disabled man right in front of Jesus, they zero in on sin. And who can forgive that? So since this is what was put onto the table by this muttering crowd, Jesus says, okay, let's go there. Now, he doesn't dive into an in-depth discussion or study on sin, which he could have done, but he limits his comments to the connection between healing and sin. He has come to address both body and soul because he knew there were interconnections between every part of the human experience. By this time in the history of humankind, the religious Jewish community had a very specific understanding of sin. And this understanding had been deeply impacted by those who had dominated, that is, colonized them for hundreds of years prior to Jesus' appearance on the Palestinian landscape. Greek philosophy and Roman, that is, European thought, explained sin as imperfection. Individual, personal imperfection. Speaker, writer, and activist Lisa Sharon Harper speaks with clarity about how the definition of sin had been warped from its original Hebrew meaning to what was believed during Jesus' time and to how it is seen today and proclaimed today. In a conversation with scholar Pete Enns, Harper explains that the Hebrew understanding of sin is not human imperfection or failure to hit a mark at all, but severed relationships. Severed relationships between individuals, between clans, between any configuration of human groupings, between people and all of creation, and between people and God. Harper reminds her hearers that all of what we consider to be the Christian scripture, including the Hebrew Bible, was written by oppressed black and brown people who were living under the domination of colonization. This includes the people that Jesus was interacting with on that day. They already showed which influences and ideologies they picked up from the colonizer. In this case, their understanding of sin. These religious legal experts pounced on Jesus, using their lens of sin, wanting to crush people's souls with guilt and shame to appear holy and superior themselves, much as we see happening today. And Jesus responds, in essence, not so fast. There is a connection between forgiving sin and healing. If people's relationships are severed at any level, it ruptures an individual's and a community's well-being. The social, human connectedness of that gathering was lacking at best. No one had thought it necessary to give up their seat, their own comfort, so that one of their siblings could get near. They weren't willing, even after hearing Jesus, to jettison their own ableist and colonized notion, but they sit tight. Jesus' words of forgiveness of sin tells this man in front of him, I see your severed relationships brought on by your inability to walk. I see your severed relationships with your faith community who do all they can to place the blame on you. I see the humiliation that you've been subjected to, and I mend that. This is intricately linked with the healing of the body. It turns out Jesus has come to address a much bigger picture than what they had counted on. They thought just of that one imperfection, whatever that might be. But he includes body and soul, and he subtly adds relationships to that because he knew the interconnection between every part of the human and created experience. As we piece together some of the possibilities motivating them to show up that day, we can ask ourselves, why do we show up? There are many arenas in which we show up daily, so I will limit it this morning to just our faith experience. Why show up? Do we show up hungry and eager to learn? Do we show up admitting to ourselves, to each other, and to God that we don't have it all together? Do we show up knowing full well that we are broken? Our relationships have been severed somewhere, whether interpersonally, in attitudes of superiority, in choosing convenience over care of the other or of creation? Do we show up to defend our own interests and comfort, causing everyone around us to adjust, even to the point of being unable to enter? Do we show up out of curiosity, expecting a novel new experience, therefore not wanting to miss out? Do we, like the man, show up to let go of baggage, the paralysis, the dependency, the imposed inferiority forced upon him? Why do we show up? As I take note of this exchange between Jesus, the religious leaders, and this man who came for healing, I, yet again, come face to face with the unexpected. Jesus' methods and priorities and willingness to offer insight into his upside-down kingdom, one piece, one brick, one insight at a time, inspires me. We don't have to see everything, grasp all of our prejudices, understand every spiritual concept accurately all of the time. That's impossible. That would be perfection. But we can be open to receiving correction, redirection, and gain new insight, leading us deeper into understanding this revolutionary kingdom. In this passage, it is Jesus' willingness to engage the issue thrown at him by those who mutter. They mutter critically. Sin is not what his hearers thought it was. It's far more comprehensive, and yet, at the same time, much less damning for the sinner, which is all of humanity, because all of us suffer severed relationships. Jesus brings this haughty, abstract discussion of sin to a place of space, the space between people. We would do well to take note of the space between us. Even if we weren't packed tightly together like they were that day, there could be alienation. There could be something between sister and brother and sibling. Even if we have distance between ourselves, that doesn't mean we are distanced. We can still be close, loving, caring. This story concludes with astonishment. The crowd had packed into this house, which now had a gaping hole in the roof, and they hadn't seen anything like this before. And that's probably not the destruction of property. And my guess is what they hadn't seen before goes far beyond seeing a man who could not walk suddenly rise, take his mat, and go home. What they witnessed was a monumental shift. They had come face to face with a leader who refused to cater to an established hierarchy. A leader who wasn't afraid to stand up to those who challenged him. A leader who saw the ordinary person's need and addressed it. A leader committed to living this kingdom of relational connectedness every day and in any way possible. Is this why we show up? May it be so.